this afternoon's session is going to be exciting, exhilarating, and insightful, right, Kat? As it always is with you, because we have some thought leaders who are coming in from all around, far and near, actually, as well, to intrigue all of you about different questions we posed throughout the morning session. How do we actually take steps forward to activate entrepreneurship, to support scaling of those businesses already on that journey? And how do we create a hub for deep tech innovation within the European cluster? As we heard this morning, Europe isn't just one group of countries and places. It's 27 small countries and some countries who don't know that they're small countries. I think Enrique said this morning, the former Italian Prime Minister. That was an insightful conversation for sure. But we're going to move on this afternoon to an even more exciting one, because we're going to bring on in a second 4 dear friends. I know 2 of you exceptionally well, getting to know Simon throughout the day. Heard great things, my friend. So friends, warmest of welcomes for this afternoon's session. Get that coffee energy over onto the stage, because we're all going to need it. We have the wonderful Kat Borlongan, Chief Impact Officer at Contentsquare and EIC board member. Kat, come on stage. So good to see you. Come and join us over here. And we also have Bindi, who I've seen and known for so long. You're fantastic. Give it up for Bindi, European Innovation Expert and Advisor and EIC Ambassador. Also, Simon Schaefer, I've mentioned already, CEO at Factory. Simon, come join us on stage, my friend. Running this panel will be András, Acting Head of the Taskforce on Startup and Scaleups and Head of Innovation Policy and Access and Finance Unit at the Directorate General.
Cheers.
Good to see you. Welcome.
Cheers. All right. Okay, ready to go. Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Let's wake up. Let's start this. So, Europe really is at a transformational moment. I think that's going to be part of our discussion. We are on the verge of change, whether it is increasing tariffs, whether it is disruptions in supply chains, whether it is military aggression on our borders. I think there is one narrative which is emerging quite substantially, and that is the role of innovation and the role of innovative companies. This is also the reason why the Commission has designated for the first time a commissioner dedicated to startups. And this is also the reason why she was tasked to adopt the first ever EU startup and scale-up strategy. This is what we will be discussing today. The timing is ripe because we are in the fully operational drafting mode of the strategy. And we will hear from our panelists on how they see what this strategy can do or should do for the European deep tech ecosystem. But before we do that, we actually have a commissioner who cannot join us physically, but he has kindly sent a video message that we will hear right now. So he is Commissioner Michael McGrath, the Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, and the rule of law, and also consumer protection. So let's have a look at the Commissioner's message.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Commissioner Michael McGrath here, and I do regret that I'm not able to join you at the European Innovation Council Summit in person today. This is an important event and a great opportunity to exchange ideas and experience between innovators and policymakers. Innovation is vital to all our daily lives, addressing important needs in healthcare, technology and sustainability, and it helps to connect communities globally. Enhancing EU competitiveness and driving innovation is at the top of our political agenda. And for the EU to be more innovative and more competitive, we must create the right business environment for companies across our union. And this means simplification, reducing burdens and supporting companies to set up and grow in the EU. An important proposal that I will be delivering is the 28th regime, which will help innovative companies to benefit from a single, harmonised set of EU-wide rules wherever they invest and operate in the single market. It will address the need for an EU-wide company legal status, and important issues around insolvency, labour and tax law will be considered. This initiative reflects long-standing calls from across the business sector, particularly the start-up community. As an example of this engagement, earlier this year, I met with EU Inc., who submitted to Commissioner Zaharayeva and I their industry blueprint, which provides valuable input for this initiative. And we will have further engagement with interested stakeholders over the period ahead. And I will be working closely with my Commission colleagues as to how we can improve the business environment for innovative companies, from streamlining the corporate legal framework they operate under, to improving access to markets, skilled labour and the capital they need to grow. The company law element of the 28th regime will cover a wide range of areas, including company formation, capital, public disclosure requirements, internal organisation and cross-border mobility. And it will build further on online procedures and digital tools in EU company law. The High-Level Forum on Justice for Growth, which I have launched, will facilitate a strategic political discussion among Member States, the European Parliament and stakeholders on how EU civil law, company law and the digitalisation of justice can contribute to competitiveness and growth. And I will continue with broad consultations, including through an open public consultation in late spring. The most important voice to hear is that of the business community itself, in particular SMEs and innovative companies, about the practical day-to-day problems that they face. I am committed to listening to what businesses have to say and encourage you to actively take part in consultations and to share your experiences. Innovators help create a better future for us all. I commend you for your work to improve well-being, and I wish you fruitful discussions during this panel and the rest of the event. And I do hope that I can catch up with you in person soon. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So why is this important? Why was it important that Commissioner McGrath delivered this message? It is important because it shows that the Commission is really tackling this issue not only from the perspective of research and innovation, so your traditional silo mentality, but we are really applying here what is fashionably called a whole-of-government approach, bringing in all the instruments that can help startups and scale-ups grow in Europe. Is there really a momentum? Let's start with that, because also Commissioner McGrath mentioned there are a number of startups and SMEs saying this is really the moment for Europe to act. This is a decisive moment. Let's start with Kat. Do you think this is the moment for Europe to change?
I mean, I think last year was the moment. The year before that was the moment. Maybe the year before that was also the moment. I mean, if we're being really honest, and you sort of like try to plot it across all the different crises over the last few years that have transformed the way that we see startups. And I don't know if, maybe I'm dating myself here, but I don't know if anybody remembers, but it was not so long ago that we still saw startups at these sort of like cute little puppies or kids with hoodies eating pizza and playing foosball in the background, right? And that was the general image we had as startups, and and when people were doing policy, that's what they were thinking. And then a series of things happened. COVID happened, and then suddenly we realized that startups had already penetrated everybody's daily lives, right? They were used to access healthcare, to entertain our children, to perform like basic financial operations and so on. And then the war in Ukraine happened as well. At which point you suddenly started seeing a peak in a lot of the questions on deep tech that had to do with security. So everything from agri-tech, climate tech, cyber, defense. And then now, with, I think if we were to quote the commissioner, now that as we've been let down by our longest ally, the way that we perceive startups, and I hope the way that startups perceive themselves has changed as well. Because now it's no longer about, it's no longer just about improving the business environment or making things more seamless or more fluid. Now it's about making sure we are consistently and quickly and immediately producing global market leaders. We're not talking about SMEs anymore. We're not talking about cute little startups. We are talking about the future of Europe, our ability to maintain what we call our sovereignty, or our ability to still make orders instead of taking orders. And what hangs in the balance are the kind of companies that we see at the EIC Summit.
Thank you. Simon, what's your take on that? Is there really something which has changed? Is it really, are we creating new opportunities? Or are the challenges being addressed? Should they be addressed? Is it a good time?
It's a fantastic time. I would argue it's always been a good time, like you said. But it is a fantastic time, and I think the first time that over 10 years I've been participating in consultations, I think the startup community has been saying similar things, if not the same things, for a rather long time. And then happened the Letter report and the Draghi report. And I think that this created a sense of urgency that we did not have before in the room. And I applaud to that. I think that's exactly where it's at. I was recently part of the consultation, and I think what I said was, our survival instincts need to kick in. It's at that point in time. And I think the circumstantial evidence, both war as well as technological sovereignty, everything that is going on where we are unsure as Europeans how to define ourselves, I would speak to that's a fantastic opportunity. Because not only will we need to create amazing companies in order to balance the playing field, but also we will need to get together as Europe, and I sense that already. I think that's happening, and I think the first indications are out there when the memes of what Europe does wrong are overtaken by the memes of what amazing companies we have in Europe.
Bindi, you have been advising a number of startups. You're on the boards of several startups. Are they telling you it's Groundhog Day, or?
In a way, it feels a bit like that. And I'm going to start with a history lesson, because I was one of the first board members back when the initiative launched end of 2017. And I'll never forget the slide that was shown to us at our first board meeting, that the top 25 tech companies, or back then as we called it, internet-enabled companies on Earth were either in the US or China. And where was Europe and UK? I will add that in, because being from there. Where were we on this game? And let's take inspiration from other government programs and see what we can do to enable it. So the time actually was back then. But then I fast forward to now, to 2025, and a lot of the work I've done in my career is I've worked in corporate, I've worked in a startup, I've spent time here with the EIC for many years and Startup Europe, and I've worked as an investor in a fund that's London, but investing across Europe. And back then, they weren't necessarily communicating with each other. And what I'm seeing, just even in the last 2 days here, is sitting in a policy session with Kat yesterday, and we were talking about, well, what do corporates need to ensure that they can procure more easily from startups, and how can EU and the EIC be helpful with that, and then how do we crowd the investors in and enable them to work with founders who haven't hit product market fit, but they're going to get there. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing the collaboration amongst the four in the ecosystem. And that wasn't necessarily the case back in 2017, early 2018. So yeah, the time is now. We're all learning from each other, but the time was also back then. So from past to present, and let's carry the momentum forward, I say.
Very good. Let's start to focus on some of the issues which are there as frequently mentioned by the startup and the scale-up community as still holding Europe back. One of the things, Commissioner McGrath alluded to that as well, are the existing regulatory complexities, the bureaucratic hurdles that are still out there, especially if companies want to scale across borders. So I want to test it with Simon first, because you have been also initiating the EU Inc. petition. The audience may have spotted that, even if you haven't mentioned, because you're branding it quite actively. So from your perspective, is there really a tension between the regulation and the landscape for startups and scale-ups? What needs to be done? What would you advise regulators to change to allow startups to grow?
Well, a big topic. We just spoke about the vibe shift and whether that's happening, and I think a lot to do with it is marketing and branding. So hence I'm wearing the hat. I need to take a page out of the American playbook here. No, What needs to change? I think we looked at the EU Inc. initiative from a very simple perspective. If you are a startup, let's say from Slovakia, it doesn't matter, any country that is not in the ranking of the top 5, and you want to get an investor in your seed round, 250K, from Berlin, from London, from Paris, from wherever. That investor has a fiduciary duty to those that gave him the money to understand every aspect of the corporate law of the company, of the country he's investing in. Yeah. Now, of course, he needs to call a lawyer to do that, and that lawyer will charge him anywhere between 10 and 50,000 euros for a proper legal opinion of what that investment entails as risk. In many cases, if it's just one in one country, this is just economically not feasible. So we set sail and said, so why don't we create a corporate law that is universal across Europe, and it touches only a minimum viable product of what you need as a startup to start a company. So you have a cap table, you have shareholders, you have your investors that you can easily transact shares with, and you have your governance, which is board meetings, shareholders agreement, and investment minutes. Super straightforward, rather simple, all online-based, API first. Super important, API first. Why? Because that is the potential to actually drive an ecosystem around that, as we have learned from Estonia with the e-residency, to be likely to be created. Service providers, certain aspects that's not in the MVP that the private sector will solve, etc., etc. And then we launched a petition with this. Surprisingly, inside a few days, we had 7,000 people signing this petition, because the message is so simple. Why don't we have a simplified, online-based European corporate law? And we realized that, challenging a commission is a complicated policy beast. There's a lot of people in there. It's a big thing to do. Why not even provide a how-to? Why don't we go as far as designing the thing? And we called up some of the law offices that work across Europe, such as Auric and Bird, and asked them to design it with us. And we put out this 50-page document that is crowdsourced. It's online. We asked our community, again, for feedback. And I think that is a blueprint on how this could work. And now, what do we expect from that? What I personally expect from that, the first of all and most important fact around all this, all of our corporate law in the world is from before the internet. Yeah. Exclamation mark. Like, how is our legal system and framework regulating innovation? Just the fact that 9 out of 10 startups fail in solvency law has never been touched, has never been discussed. So it makes so much sense to do this. But what's the vision? I think the vision could be that instead of what we have now, go to the US to scale, because it's so much easier, go to Europe to found your company. And wouldn't that be an unfair advantage?
100%.
Could that be the sort of European Delaware, which would also attract companies from other countries to actually come and scale in Europe?
If it's the best product for our customer, which is the startups, why wouldn't it?
Excellent. Kat, you had your fair share of experience with facing regulatory burdens, also as the director of La French Tech, where you have been looking at also all the obstacles that exist ahead of the French startup and scale-up community. So what was your experience with tackling regulation and bureaucratic burdens, and how successful were you?
I love how you're asking me that question. Since you're French, clearly you must know about regulatory burdens. Let's put it this way. I think that when you are tackling regulatory aspects, so just to clarify, 28th regime first, sector-based regulatory stuff second. But when you're tackling regulatory-based issues regarding startups, I mean, it's true there are a lot of things that you can fix that are broken, right? And I think that's how you framed it in the work that you've done on looking for calls to evidence. We're looking at everything that's broken. But for me, regulations that are not adapted to startups are a symptom and not the cause. And so what you really need to go for is to fundamentally change the way that regulation is done so that startups are actually part of the very early design process. So instead of designing regulation that is, let's be honest, most of our regulation in Europe is defensive. It's mostly about protecting the citizens, protecting Europe against like the big bad Americans, the big bad Chinese, right? But sometimes when we do that, we crush some of our companies along the way. So it's really a shift in mindset on, instead of being less worse, or instead of not crushing our own companies, how do we become a growth partner for them? How do we involve them very early on, and some of our champions very early on? So say some of the norms or some of the regulations that we're building on are based on the realities of some of our own champions. How do we keep that dialogue going? How do we have those feedback loops? How do we systematize the use of sandboxes and so on, and really sort of change that mindset as we move forward?
Are you suggesting to do some kind of a systematic innovation stress test before new legislation is put in place, or existing regulation to be regularly overhauled based on that?
I think there are lots of pieces to that, right? And if we're really honest, the first piece is cultural. The first piece is cultural because we don't think of regulators as growth partners. We don't think of standard makers as growth partners at all. So the first step is thinking of them as sort of part of the entire arsenal that the EU has to move the startup ecosystem forward. And that's super important. And I think that's mostly an exercise of leadership and cultural transformation. And the second part is design. And Simon is talking a lot about how they're designing the platform for the 28th regime. And if you look at it, a lot of it is your sort of basic product management, product design principles. And the question is, how can we take the best of that and incorporate it into how we design regulation? Because at the end of the day, it is a product that is being used by users that has an intended consequence. And so since you want me to talk about France, we did have something like that. We called it a smart regulation, surprise. And so it was used from everything to say like drafting some of the first regulatory basis on cyberbullying and online crime, for example, where we sent our regulators to Palo Alto to work directly with Meta on it. Things like that, where they come in really early. We have something called the French Tech 120, which are France's top 120 companies. We've also identified sector by sector some of the top companies in climate, in AI, and so on. And they actually also have privileged access to some of the regulators very early on, which are facilitated by their, what we call like the startup success managers or their account managers, to facilitate the dialogue.
Excellent. And you mentioned smart regulation, and I think there are some in the startups scale-up community who are saying that, listen, actually there are some regulations which are quite helpful. Without regulation, you would probably still have 27 national incumbent telecom operators in the EU. You would probably not have still a unitary patent. So I think it's the smart regulation approach. But I wanted to test it with Bindi, how you actually see that. Is there sort of indeed a good regulation, and what would that be for the startups?
Well, actually, I'll use an example from the UK that I have seen working fairly well. Obviously, the open banking standard was born from thinkers from there, but they were thinking about how that applies across Europe. But I'll call out the regulatory, the sandbox from the FCA, so the Financial Conduct Authority, and how they engaged with startups over the last many, many years. So when crypto was a thing, there were crypto-based startups working alongside the regulator in-house, pushing the envelope of what the regulation should be, but the regulator was also there spending time with the startups going, this is where you might go wrong. And so they were kind of collaborating with each other. So, and we talked about this as in our prep for the panel, sandbox are just the start, right? It is, again, and I go back to my message from my first comment, it's about the collaboration and understanding each other's languages. The language of the regulator and the absolute innovative capabilities of the startup to push the envelope, and how do they learn from each other and grow and move forward. And from that, you're seeing the birth of the Revoluts, the N26s, the Monzos, the Wises of the world, from the innovators who are coming in and working alongside the regulator. So please, let's have more of that. And I think there's lessons to be learned from those more forward-thinking ones. And there's certainly a lot of that happening stateside as well. So food for thought for everyone in the room.
Excellent. Let me stay with you, Bindi, because we touched upon regulation, but of course that's only one important aspect of helping startups and scale-ups grow. Another big challenge remains access to finance. And although there has been quite some progress in the recent years, including also the establishment of the European Innovation Council, and quite some development in the European VC market in the last 8 years, the European VC market is actually growing twice as fast as the US, of course, starting from a significantly lower base, but still there is a huge growth potential there. So I wanted to see also with your investor venture partner hat on, where you see the remaining obstacles for access to finance.
Well, I don't know if it's about access to finance. I'm going to go back to this collaboration thing. And again, we were having a really lovely discussion as we were preparing. And there's actually a lot of money out there. There's a lot, as we call it, a lot of dry powder. And VCs, because of the relationship they have with their LPs and other folks who are putting money into their fund, they have an obligation to return the money. And by our very nature in UK and Europe, we're a lot more conservative in our approach to investing. I think that's changing, but we are more risk averse. And I think the commentary, like, we need to get to a product market fit, I need evidence and traction before I can put money into you. And that's where this EIC funding, I think, plugs the gap really nicely. You're giving that founder more runway to prove the product. You're giving them the support to learn how to commercialize it, do the right sales and marketing messages, open doors to corporates to get that first pilot and then therefore first paying customer. So it's sort of plugging that gap, I think that's the point. And then the other thing I'll talk about is the relationship between venture capital and their LPs. And there's a pressure on limited partners on the VCs to return the money. So then the question is, those LPs, they're used to that kind of risk profile, right? It's 10, 15, 20-year payback. But when you start to get the pension funds in, and we talked about France and UK is now starting to do similar stuff, and I'm not sure Germany's doing it yet. But then the pension funds are inherently even more risk averse. So it's about what do we do to address that whole value chain, from the pension funds to the LPs, to the fund of funds, to the funds, to the founders, and sort of addressing that. And then the EIC kind of helps plug that gap. And I don't think we're communicating across that quite yet and collaborating and learning from each other quite yet. We're getting there, but we have a way to go.
You wanted to react to that, Kat? I saw you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I mean, access to finances, it's framed, I don't know if that was intentional, right? But it's framed in a way that sounds like everyone should have finance. And it's a problem that we're not using taxpayer money to spread it all across the region, And I think the word that you said, Bindi, that resonates the most is gap. I think that if I were to, two things are gaps. So when we talk about Europe right now, I think there are two major gaps and another one that's emerging. The first one, as we all know, is early stage deep tech, usually pre-commercialization, right when you need to find your first clients to really get the revenue moving. CapEx heavy as well, and a lot of the VCs that we have in Europe are not usually suited to CapEx heavy investments.
They run a mile.
Yeah. And the second, as we know, is growth stage. It's usually where a lot of those sort of foreign investors come in and so on. And then the third one, is also a lot of the widening countries, like countries with much earlier startup ecosystems that have not been as well exposed to the rest of the investment community. And again, even when, as Bindi talks about the role of the EIC and coming in to plug one or two of those gaps, that's still temporary. I mean, my biggest dream is the EIC disappear because we don't need it anymore. What we need to do, as Bindi's right, is to make sure that the entire flywheel is being fixed. Now, the reason why there isn't a lot of funding that's coming in isn't because our startups are not as great as the ones in the US or as the ones in China. It's because, from a liquidity perspective, we're not doing so well. We have a lot of things.
Very few.
100%. And that needs to be the priority as opposed to prolonging the temporary Band-Aid for a market that is not working quite the way it should.
What would be your recommendations for both European and national policymakers on the issue of risk averseness and what keeps away mostly institutional investors from the VC asset class in the EU. We know that 0.02% of the assets are invested significantly lower than in the US. What would you recommend?
You're asking me.
Essentially, all three.
Yeah, I was like, why don't
All
we
three
start
of
with
you.
Simon? I was like, you had some great calls.
You were talking about the flywheel. I mean, this is such a large topic because ultimately it's a culture shift that needs to take place. And you know, I'm from Germany. There's a crime TV show called Tatort, and the bad guy is always the entrepreneur. But that's a culture shift problem. And I mean, look, today, this morning, you heard from Carlos Moedas about how he pushes the innovation agenda in Lisbon as a city, and his advisors are telling him this is not for political capital. Like, he's not gaining anything from that on the political arena. And I think the same is true for Emmanuel Macron. I mean, he's been pushing the entrepreneurship agenda broad and wide. And I think that's one of the key challenges we have, not just with venture capital, risk averseness, startups, how many companies are actually being founded and funded, but in general as Europe. I mean, this is one of the key things that holds us back, to market our successes, to take the entrepreneurs with us on road shows when there's trade associations going anywhere, to showcase, this is from my home country, he's so awesome, please listen to what he has to say. And when regulation is designed, to bring them to the table early, to contribute what they know about where their hurdles were and where they failed. And last but not least, this is really dear to my heart, from 10 startups, 9 fail. And these 9, we're not asking anything because they're usually already gone. So we're usually designing what we're doing for that 10% that actually makes it and is successful. And I would say we should focus dramatically on early stage to have as many companies founded and funded as possible, because startups in tech is a numbers game. The more startups there are, the more unicorns there will be. If 8 out of 10 companies fail and not 9 out of 10, we would already have double the unicorns.
Yeah, and if I may add, I spent a lot of my career working for Silicon Valley or West Coast-based American firms and being the person launching and delivering across Europe. And the attitude to founders and entrepreneurship and just ability to execute is just so different there. And we could learn from that. So many times I hear, oh, well, you can't do that, you can't do that. The Americans go, well, what if you can? Let's give it a go, right? And then it happens. Who thought that you could disrupt a hotel industry or a taxi industry or a car industry in the way that some of the big companies on the West Coast have? And I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is the attitude to failure. Going back to Simon's metrics, 9 out of 10 startups fail. I think we're better now, but there's still a bit of a shame associated with, oh, my company failed. Americans go, and by the way, I'm not American, just I was raised in the western part of Canada, but the Americans go, oh, you failed. What did you learn? Dust yourself off, get up again, and go for it again. And so the best entrepreneurs may have not worked out the first, second, or third time, but they just have that focus, and they're just going to keep going until they succeed and they execute. And I think across Europe, we can learn to better do that and have that attitude to risk and that attitude to failure that I learned from the companies I worked with. So we need to all learn that, all of us in the audience.
We had an excellent idea last Friday. There was a hackathon, a startup policy hackathon organized by the European Startup Network and Allied for Startups. And it was really a first and I would say quite unique experience from the Commission side, because you rarely do hackathons as a part of your formal consultation process. It's not your ordinary public consultation process. But it was a great event because there were a number of startups coming with ideas for the strategy. And one of them was to create a bonus bankruptcy point system, which would actually allow you to get favorable treatment for your second loan or for your new financing, provided that you have gone bust already at least once.
Probably need to be thoughtful about that.
Some creative ideas. Creative ideas. Okay. We discussed regulation. We discussed a bit of financing, but it's not only about those two. It's really about what what you would call a successful innovation ecosystem. With all the right networks, the services provided, the support systems, the connections. So I want to come back to Simone to see what you think about the emergence of various strong European innovation hubs. There are, I think, quite a few which are doing very well, and you have various rankings which show the benefits of their operation. What do you think should be done at a pan-European level if we are building successful innovation ecosystems?
Very interesting question. So my business, which actually pays what I eat, is building clusters of entrepreneurs. So we're putting together buildings in which we try to bring the best of what the ecosystem has to offer together. And the interesting part is, and then we back off because we can let that community pretty much do what it's best at. And I personally strongly believe, and this is also why we went to Southern Europe instead of London or Paris with our second one. We started in Berlin and we did Lisbon, and we're likely to continue in Southern Europe because that's where it adds the most value. And I would argue that the internet is based on a very similar principle, TCP/IP. So whoever's not doesn't know how that protocol works, it's built in a way that if one node is no longer online, still the information is available to distribute. And wouldn't it be great if this was the superpower of Europe? We don't have a hegemonial approach where we have one center where everything is being done like Silicon Valley, but no. We have a multicultural version of that, a network of nodes across Europe in which we cluster the best of what we know and then help them to communicate with each other. And I think that's a role the Commission can very well play. And I would go as far as government should build real estate, but that's a whole new panel.
Excellent. How would that work? Say a few words about that.
Well, so space is an extremely expensive commodity. And I see the starting of a company as a very challenging act where you need to get a lot of things together in order to do that. And one of them is an office, at least starting at a certain size. And what we learned with building our business with Factory is that clustering people clustering entrepreneurs and innovators has such an enormous impact on the surrounding. We had visits from captains of the industry that were surprised at how tangible it is what entrepreneurs are doing. We had academia figure out how entrepreneurs are so different to researchers by being in touch with them. So creating an interface where actually the innovation economy becomes more tangible and not just this fluffy thing with bytes flying around and nobody really knows what it is, I think is an incredible advantage, and the key to that is space.
You might know that the Commission actually has created a housing task force with the intention to address problems of affordable housing, which is a major social issue in the EU. Would you suggest that the mandate is potentially expanded of the Housing Task Force to also look at ways to provide physical space for startups?
I would limit it to early stage because it's about where you start, not so much where you grow. That's when you're more successful and have limitless capabilities. But there's an interesting thing happening around our place where we live. The borders between living, working, so it's called the third place, is all getting a bit more fuzzy. And I do believe that your work culture with your daily life is very intertwined nowadays. So I'm rarely offline and I'm working most of the time and I have the capability to do that. And I think that's really advantageous. And I think supporting that strategically from an infrastructural perspective, absolutely yes.
Kat, you addressed probably also some of these questions during your time at La French Tech. Broader discussions on ecosystems also relate to access to talent. Where do you see the sort of major obstacles that the EU is facing in this particular area, the ecosystems?
I mean, maybe depends on what we think an ecosystem is, right? And for me, an ecosystem is a place where the flywheel happens. You have a pool of talent, they launch companies, those companies, some of them fails, they can launch companies again, some of them will succeed, they'll exit. When they exit, they're able to re-inject capital, talent, know-how, experience, everything back into the ecosystem. This happens over and over and over and over again until you get a compounding effect that are what we call our powerful hubs. And if I were to summarize the approach that we had when I was leading the French Tech, it was essentially cheating. Because you could, wait and let that happen, wait for the first and the second and the third generation to come. Or as the state who does have this, sort of special magic wand, which is government intervention, be able to accelerate some of those things. So for me, or accelerate or stop barriers to some of those things. And if I were to pick only two, the first one is talent, by far. When we talk about talent, we tend to think only of students who are graduating from STEM backgrounds or so on. But if you look at the talent gap in Europe, a lot of it is related to companies that are scaling, finding battle-tested talent, usually your VPC levels that have gone from not just from 5 to 15, but from 50 to 500, from 500 to 1,000. So it's about making Europe really the best place in the world to come and work for a startup. We already know about the lifestyle component. Let's tell them a little bit about the startup component. And the second one, again, is, I talk about these things because of the French experience, which again is very interventionist. We created the most open tech Vs in the world to enable these sort of things. So you have a lot of things that have been done by the French for that. But the models that I actually also find super interesting are the models more like, Estonia or Sweden, where they really, you didn't have that same level of intervention, but you did have community support that allowed those successful entrepreneurs to be able to give back to their communities more quickly and more efficiently. So again, at the end of the day, if I were to pick two things, it's talent and exits. You want to talk about, I know you talked about real estate, and just because I had a baby also, I gotta say, man, none of these places are adapted for moms, right? We're always thinking about, when we think about founders, right? We think about these young, fresh grads.
Parents.
We don't think
Can
about
I say parents?
Okay.
Parents.
Maybe moms who are breastfeeding also need special facilities, but yeah. But it's true. It's like when we think about how to design ecosystems, it's not just about more, it's about how and what those ecosystems signify and how they better reflect European values. Ecosystems at the end of the day are places where we live, grow, raise our families, and all of those things need to be factored in.
So, Bindi, if you're approached next time at a major startup conference in the US, lots of investors, highly skilled individuals are running around and they're asking you, so why should I come to Europe? Is there something that I should benefit from there? What's in it for me?
They're already coming. I mean, that's a fact, right? Mm-hmm. I cannot tell you the number of folks I'm seeing stateside who are landing in Lisbon. There's a ton in London. I actually do a keynote on the history of the London tech ecosystem because we are the third largest in the world, and it's valued at 1.1 trillion as of the beginning of last year. And that's insane compared to what it was. So I think if you build it, they will come, to quote a movie. I think, Simon, I know when I go to Berlin or Lisbon, I love landing at factory, and I know I can just hang out and I'll find people there. I think some of the stuff they did in Portugal, the number of British founders I know that have upped sticks post the B word and have now relaunched and set up their businesses in Lisbon because the Portuguese made it very easy for these founders to reestablish themselves. They're working just as hard. They're loving the life. They're raising their families there. They're buying property. So I think building it, they will come. And then we still all got to look at the core components of a startup ecosystem. You've got to have the founders who are leading it. You need the investors. You need the government. You need the accelerators on the property. You need the people that support, the lawyers, the accountants, the tax advisors, the insolvency specialists. You need the ecosystem builders, right? And I would arguably say that the three of us are that. Despite the hats we wear, we're all ecosystem builders. And so many folks I've met in the audience are exactly that. My pack of fellow EIC ambassadors, that's what they all are. So we know each other, and we learn from each other, and let's build it. So you need to build some more factories, Simon.
So it seems.
So that's my kind of commentary.
Great. Thanks a lot. There have been a lot of excellent ideas that we will certainly have the opportunity to assess, and then we'll see how we can include them in the startup and scale-up strategy. But one thing which I think we'll have to be very clear about is that if we don't measure what the strategy is going to deliver, then it might not get done. So I just wanted to throw at you a very last and very short question on what would be the single indicator that you would look at if you wanted to say, the EU has developed this strategy and it delivered because?
I don't know, what's the goal? You tell me.
What should be?
What's the goal? And I'll kind of give you the metric.
What should be
What's
the goal?
of the startup strategy, right? Like, I mean, I think that's it. Because if you ask me what I think the goal is or should be, I mean, it's not about supporting startups. It's not about, accelerating fundraising velocity. It's not about, not about having more unicorns, certainly. I think it's about making sure that Europe has global market leaders that can shape the kind of future that we want and shape it for Europeans. And that, at the end of the day, is at the very end of the flywheel. And you can only really measure by metrics like, percentage of global market share, sector by sector, percentage of global market share. I mean, these are funny because these are not metrics that we look at all, because they're so far along that we don't even think it's possible, that we don't even hold ourselves to that kind of level of ambition, that we're still measuring all of the little milestones along the way. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, if that's the goal, then that's what we should be looking towards.
Simon, what's your take?
Oof, there's so many factors. First trillion-euro company, I could say.
Here.
The amount of startups funded and founded would be a way to grasp it. But I would say one of the key challenges I see is that entrepreneurs usually don't care about policy. They're saying, leave me alone with this because it's not for me anyway, and I'm just trying to build my business, and I'll deal with it when I get there. And maybe this is the vehicle with which the European Commission can gain the trust of the entrepreneurs to actually really involve in policy, finally. I think we're exceptions by doing that. There's not so many that are really keen to work in policy, and that should change because it's the framework we all work in.
I think for me, I'm going to go back to the flywheel concept. And there is a slide, Atomico, HSBC, and ORIC do an annual Startup Europe report. And one of my favorite slides that I saw on that was probably 2 or 3 years ago, which is the number of startups that were founded by former employees of current European unicorns. And I loved that number. So we all talk about the historical Skype mafia, and 22 companies were founded from that. Obviously, Tavit went and founded Wise. Now, Wise have founded, former employees, early employees of Wise have founded 23 companies. And so what you're seeing is in the deal room as VCs were like, oh, that new founder was part of the early scale at Revolut. We're going to look at that because we know they learned from that initial scale. And then what we're finding is the founders of those companies are investing in their former employees. So it's this amazing metric of like startup mafias in Europe being a thing. And so let's grow that bigger. And I want to see 50, 100 companies founded from Wise and Revolut and Zalando, all these companies. And to me, that's a pretty awesome metric.
Actually, that reminds me of one metric that we actually used in French government because, again, the same situation that Simon was describing in the sense that we didn't see the biggest problem necessarily regulatory barriers or, visas or whatever. The biggest problem was trust. And the proof of that was that some of the most successful French founders have founded American companies, right? Snowflake, Datadog, and so on. And so one interesting metric that I think would be worth looking at more medium term, even though I still hold to the market share as the long-term one, would be the founder balance. Percentage of European founders that launch companies in, say, like the US versus percentage of, or number of American founders that launch companies here. And you can do that based on, with other countries and also see in terms of the growth and revenue how that balances out.
Yeah.
kind of like our export metric to a certain extent, export-import metric.
Keep them here locally. Exactly.
Very good. I think we do have to wrap up. I'll just take two messages home, actually two single words from the discussion. One is urgency, because I think that whatever we discussed in terms of things to be done need to be done very, very fast, probably faster than your normal policy or legislative cycle. And the other one is credibility, and the credibility in terms of the actions that need to be put forward and their expected impact, and credibility in the sense that they need to be devised hand in hand with those who are actually going to be affected or benefiting from that. So with that, thank you all very much.
Sorry. Wait, I would not be able to go to sleep tonight if I did not say this. We talked about like startup scale-up strategy, and we did not mention the word execution.
You gotta deliver. It's nothing without.
Because let's not forget, like ideas, even good ones, are cheap, right? At the end of the day, as everybody in this room knows, especially the founders, it all boils down to execution.
Absolutely.
So
I put
let's
it
not
under
forget that
credibility.
part.
I have put that down under credibility, but I'm happy to have it a third category.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you all very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Kat. András, thank you so much.